All right, so an expansion, really we've already kind of covered that. So expansion is coming either naturally, with a natural increase in the margin product of labor that occurs over time with innovations and improvements in productivity, and or it comes from some interventions by the fiscal or monetary authorities with an expansionary policy. So what does an expansion look like? Pretty straightforward here. The quantity of labor and the wage. I have my labor supply. And I'm going to start us off here with labor demand. And I'm going to look at the case where our wages are downwardly rigid. So the wage level is really kind of fixed here in our economy at some level. We'll call it W1 here. And so our current level of employment is L1, which is relatively low. And what happens in an expansion is that labor demand starts to increase. And so just notice in the first change here, employment is increasing. And if you look at the decrease in unemployment, so I'm going to call this U2 for the unemployment, the difference between full employment, where unemployment is really only voluntary in that sense, and our current level of employment, L2. And so let me just draw where we started. And this amount here, I'm going to call U1. That was the amount of unemployment we started with. And because of the increase in labor demand, the unemployment has gone down. And the opposite of that, the reason it's happening, is because employment has increased, and that's causing real GDP to go up. This process is going to continue until, hopefully, we get back to here, where we're only left with frictional unemployment, the unemployment that occurs as it takes time to find a job. So we eventually return to L3, which is what I call full employment. And that doesn't mean everyone is working. It just means the unemployment rate is at its natural rate, meaning we only have frictional unemployment. Only unemployment that's left over from the time it takes to find a job. So that's where we were as of last month. The unemployment rate was 3.5%. That's pretty close to possibly even slightly below our natural rate of unemployment. And there we were. So eventually here we're going to look at, what happens if labor demand continues to kind of increase. Notice we don't get any changes in employment, but we do get increases in the wage. And we'll think about how that may relate to inflation over longer periods of time. But we'll get there. So an expansion, pretty straightforward. Increases in labor demand, increases in employment, decreases in unemployment. And that's exactly what it looks like on the labor market diagram. So I've got a question here on Learning Objective 6 that kind of walks us through this and has us compare recessions with flexible wages to recessions with downwardly rigid wages. So please have a look at those. Give them a try and go through these and take notes on them. And you should be well prepared to answer a number of the homework questions at this point. Up next, we will move on to our next two learning objectives, which is different explanations of the business cycle and the role of what we call multipliers.